president took lots of questions from reporters before a cabinet meeting, rambling a bit at times, and it provided fodder for the anti-Trump pundits who have been questioning his mental stability.
It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I think I would have been a good general, but who knows?
I actually think the president is mentally incapacitated, and I have thought so for quite some time.
I think what needs to happen is the Republicans got to go over there and change the president's diapers, Don.
If you thought that his pathological lying could not become more pathological or that he could not become more delusional, you were wrong.
This is a man who obviously is not fit to hold the office, and we've known that for a very long time.
Joining us now from New York is Ben Domenech, the founder and publisher of The Federalist. And Ben, president says a lot of things, as we just saw. Sometimes he goes off and says things that are funny or off color or fact challenge. Does that in any way justify these commentators, mostly on the left but some on the right, questioning his mental stability?
Howie, it's good to be with you. Absolutely it doesn't. I mean, presidents say all sorts of ridiculous things all the time, and of course it doesn't put you in a position where you ought to be removed from office if the president says some things that offend Joe Scarborough. I mean, the reality is this is just once more into the breach again from a group of people who've been insisting that the walls are closing in on the president, that he's unfit for office since the day that he arrived at the White House virtually. It took them only a few months for the New York Times to print an opinion basically calling for the invocation of the 25th Amendment, as Joe Scarborough just did. And it's just as silly an idea now as it was then. The reality is that they're boxed in because they understand that as much as they would like to see this president removed, the Democrats, even Speaker Pelosi, are not ready to move on something like that. And her new standard apparently is to look for a bipartisan wave of support for removing the president before they would even proceed with the kind of impeachment hearings that, as we've seen this week, the most radical fringe of her own party already support.
I think part of it is a lot of these commentators, they just can't stand Donald Trump's style. So, you know, he rambles, and then Chris Hayes, the MSNBC host, tweeted after that presser, his brain is broken. But I'm sure that all the people in this country who don't like Donald Trump are saying, yeah, he's crazy, whatever. But how do these attacks, which get brutally personal at times, talking about changing his diapers, I mean, it's just incredible. Do they undermine the credibility of those making these charges, or does it just reinforce their popularity with the people who like their side?
It does both. I mean, it undermines the authority that I think they have to speak to the middle of the country, which is experiencing some incredible job growth, which is just has seen, you know, several good developments over the past several months of the president's tenure. I think that the real problem that they run into is that where you might, in a normal situation, be trying to convince some significant portion of Republicans to go a step beyond what Mitt Romney was saying, to say, yes, you know, this is unacceptable, and it might rise to the level where he needs to be removed. Instead, none of these commentators are engaging in that kind of convincing evangelism. They're just preaching to the same crowd that already agrees with them and agreed with them from day one when he arrived in office, as we saw in the marches and protests that showed up right after that.
Right. Now, it's no secret that President Trump has divided the conservative media, some of whose members make a nice living attacking him, particularly on a channel whose initials begin with MS. Where does that put a conservative site like The Federalist?
You know, I think it puts us in a very interesting position. This is a really disruptive time for media on the right of center. I mean, you've seen the developments over the past couple of months. The demise of the Weekly Standard is an enormously significant event.
Which the president, by the way, went on Twitter and gloated about all those people losing their jobs because it had a lot of voices opposed to President Trump.
Yes, he certainly did. I think, though, unfortunately, in this environment, the most important thing is to keep a level head while everyone around you might be losing theirs. To really evaluate things based on the facts as we know them and understanding them, as opposed to letting your hair get on fire every time that the president, you know, engages in some latest tweet storm. I think the errors that have been done by a number of media organizations aren't confined to the left or to the right. I think they misjudge the country in a lot of different ways. The president obviously exploited that. It's one of the reasons that he became president. And I think that what we'll continue to try to do is to cover the culture and the politics of this country as they are, not as we would like them to be.
But is it a challenge for conservative journalists like you and your colleagues when he does things, whether it is related to the government shutdown, whether it's pulling out of Syria, whether it's not sufficiently shrinking government spending, that clash with the principles that you happen to believe in?
Well, I happen to agree with the president's decision when it comes to Syria, but I don't think that we should necessarily sort of view these things as being of only one ideological spectrum. He does things that are both conservative and that are non-conservative. And I think that you can evaluate those things as they are and what develops from them. I mean, particularly on the issues of trade, which I think have been so clouded and so unfortunately not debated on the right for so long. The president kind of cracked that open in ways that I don't necessarily like in every aspect, but he does make it something that is a focus of debate. And I think it's important to have those debates take place in the media landscape as opposed to pretending, as we did for many years, that they don't exist. What we got out of that was a 2016 cycle in which a lot of people, unfortunately, didn't have an answer when it came to was the Iraq War the right decision or not, something that I think we should have been debating for the past 8 years.
So in many ways, he has forced a more healthy and more honest debate. Now, the president's constant attack on fake news and dishonest journalists, he did it again, as I mentioned, against the New York Times because of the Jill Abramson book, the former executive editor. Does that continue to help Donald Trump, or is it kind of becoming background noise?
I think it's a bit of background noise now. It is a mutually enforcing sort of thing. I think there are a lot of media entities that have benefited from the fact that, in the absence of these kinds of attacks, people might be asking about their ratings. But I think this is a situation where, unfortunately, the president is making a significant critique and one that is valuable, but he's not really targeting it at the right place. I think that the biggest source of fake news in the country today are a number of organizations that actually reside in Silicon Valley. The most powerful media organization in America today is Facebook. It's not the New York Times. And they are certainly, if not the enemies of freedom of speech, they are the enemies, I think, of freedom of thought. And that's something that I think is concerning to a lot of people, not just on the right. It's of concern to a lot of old guard people on the left who believed what the ACLU was saying back in the 1990s and are concerned about this development today. There is a problem of fake news being spread, I think, but it's primarily being spread by those in social media who I think have engaged in a lot of different irresponsible behaviors, seizing on small bits of information and then spinning them out of control in ways that can't be corrected, even if you come back the next day or even within the few hours to try to do so.
Right. The president has taken some whacks at Facebook and Twitter and Google, but I think you've really hit on something, which is these companies, which don't even see themselves as media organizations, are actually become dominant, and the rest of the media are very dependent on them for these distribution channels.
Absolutely.
Ben Domenech, great to see you. Thanks for joining us from New York.
Great to be with you, Howard.